Good morning. This is Ryan Miller, Parent Dome, also supporting We Are John Galt. And I'm doing this broadcast because I viewed a bunch of First Amendment audits last evening, and I just started putting together pieces of what I call a trend. And I made some notes from last night. I have reached out to some people that follow me and that I've had a relationship with for some time in the community of psychology. And I wrote down a series of questions, and I want to just share what my thoughts were based upon behavior that I see a recurring theme within the community of those that serve the public. So I just want to clarify what the First Amendment audit, what that means. These are citizens that are students of the Constitution and want to exercise their freedoms and liberty and draw attention to the fact that our rights are being eroded through our passivity. Our ignorance and passivity has our rights being removed from us. And we accept it. And we're not even aware when we give up our rights. So these are citizens that live among us, that take their smartphone or their cameras. They go into public for educational purposes to exercise their constitutional freedoms and record in public. Photography is not a crime. The Supreme Court ruled that, The Supreme Court has ruled that the eyes cannot trespass and that there is no expectation of privacy in public. These are Supreme Court rulings which gives us their permission to function lawfully in public and record whatever our eyes can see. It's one of the reasons that World Star Hip Hop is so famous as a YouTube channel, because when people are acting outrageous and people turn the camera, people like to see people going sideways. So in the class of public servants, as it relates to my question, behavior of public servants in the face of citizen journalists, what is that behavior? Well, first of all, let's just describe public servants. Public servants are people that work for any government, state, county, federal, any employment that is predicated upon taxpayers paying them. So our taxes that the government obligates us to contribute to them, or else we lose our home or we can go to jail. It's coercion by threat. They take our money and they distribute it to the bureaucracy of public servants. Public servants being county people that work for the county, that work for the township, that work for the school district, that work for Department of Taxation or roads, or these are called civil servants or public servants, that their income is exclusively derived from taxpayers. So the United States, in our Constitution, provides our ability to interact with those that serve us. Basically, public servants are the employees of the citizens that are paying them. We're their boss. But unfortunately, they don't treat us like we're their boss. And I wanted to go in to examine and explore, why do they behave the way they do when they interact with citizens? Now, when I make the statements about public servants in a group or category, I'm not trying to say all public servants behave this way, but the evidence is revealing that very many of them do behave this way, and I'm trying to examine what are the links of this behavior from a public servant that is a law enforcement, or they're a clerk of county courts, or they're sitting behind the desk at the Department of Water, or whatever it is. Any public servant, when all of a sudden that camera is turned around on them, their behavior changes. So I'm going to share with you my thoughts on this, and I put this together, and this is kind of what I got to shut this down. So I explained that civil servants are employees of the citizens, yet their behavior is one where they are the employees, but we're the boss. We're the boss. And why do they treat us the way they do? Public servants take an oath to the Constitution, yet they're not aware of the rights and freedoms of the citizens of the oath in which they're forced to uphold. such as the First Amendment, the freedom of speech and the freedom of press. The Fourth Amendment, to be secure in our paper properties and effects. And that we have no obligation to speak to anyone. Our speech is consensual until we don't want to have a consensual conversation anymore. So we all have the ability to disengage from a conversation. We also have the ability to step away from a camera. Now, civil servants are always under the watchful eye of a camera, particularly when they have a public interface. So when a public servant is facing the public, there are security cameras on them. You go into the post office, there's security cameras. You go into the police department, there are security cameras. You go into the library, there are security cameras. Libraries are funded by the public. But they're ignorant of what the First Amendment is, what the Second Amendment is, the Fourth, the Fifth, the 14th. And honestly, John Q. Citizen is ignorant of those as well because they've been so conditioned. But let's keep going. So they are not familiar with laws and often make demands on citizens which are unlawful. So such a demand would be, turn off your camera. You're causing a disturbance. You need to leave. These are some statements. So one of them I put in there is, leave without cause other than the public servants being uncomfortable with citizens having the camera and then being an environment that's populated with cameras. So they're saying, I have to be filmed in my employment, but I don't give you permission to film me. Well, they have no basis to make that statement. That's an unlawful statement, and that's a statement in ignorance. They make up stories or laws to have a citizen stop recording. So they make statements like, this is a government facility, you're not allowed to record in a government facility. They made that up. When you are in a place accessible by public, you are allowed to come into that public place and you're able to film in that place. They also try to say things like, well, if you're not here on official business, you are not allowed to record, or you need permission for official business. I'm sorry, public servants, you don't get to determine what is official business. My official business may be that I'm hired by OSHA to come in and investigate you in silence to make sure you're complying with the safety codes as stipulated by OSHA. I may be coming in there doing an audit on behalf of an insurance company. You don't need to know, and I don't need to tell you, and you cannot fabricate a rule or a condition for what is official business. That goes to law enforcement, and that goes to public servants. Those are meaningless statements. That's part of the narrative that police say, here is the thing, and they start this narrative of BS to fabricate something for you to acknowledge you're doing something that's uncomfortable or unreasonable. It's crazy. So they make up stories or laws to have citizens stop recording. Dr. J, good to see you. I popped you with an email. This is the context of the email, by the way, Dr. J. Call the police and lie to the police, and they're lying on camera on activities that somebody with the camera is not doing. So they make statements that I've told them to leave, where they've never told them to leave, but they don't have the ability to tell them to leave. They say they're causing a disturbance when the auditor can be completely silent, but they're not causing a disturbance, but they'll say they're making a disturbance. So basically, they are filing a false report. They're making a false statement in a 911 call, and they wind up getting themselves in trouble. But I'm going to talk about the psychology of this in a second. And often, they come out incredibly aggressive. You know what? I'm going to pull this up here and do this. I don't care about it. I get clipped off. So that some of them even get combative, that they will go up to the camera, they'll swipe the camera, they will touch the person and move them out of the building. These are all unlawful, illegal, consist of assault and battery, and they can be charged for this kind of behavior. Let's keep going. Now, law enforcement has two distinct actions, different actions when they encounter a public citizen filming public servants. They have two different actions. One is based upon, some of it is related to their education level, their awareness of the Constitution and the oath that they take, and another is heavily influenced by, thanks Brandon, I appreciate that, based upon their ego. And that's called contempt of cop, that their ego, and they get escalated and they get more authoritarian because you're challenging their authority and you're actually exposing their weakness in their ignorance, and cops don't like that. So some auditors are very polite in the way they communicate. Others are very aggressive and pretty much telling the cop that they're an idiot, that you don't understand the oath that you took. But those elicit different responses. So one is an educated officer may have a very brief conversation with somebody holding the camera, then interact with the public servants. They may educate the public servants and educate the public servants that that person filming them in public, in a lobby, in a foyer, in a hallway, just leave him alone. He's not doing anything wrong. He's not causing a disturbance. If you don't want to be on camera, don't step in front of his camera. If you don't want to be heard on camera, don't talk to him. Just go about your business and do it. Just pretend it's not there and it blends into the background. Now, that is the auditor's dream. The auditor's dream is that public servants are educated to understand what our rights are. They're not there to cause harm. They're not there to cause disturbance. They have no ill will with any public servant. They're just hoping that they're educated and that when you're recording me, it's totally fine for me to record you. And as long as you're going to be honest and truthful when I do a public records request, everything is fine. But if you lie to me, I have an objective record of when you lied to me. Public servants are allowed to lie. An uneducated officer will exercise his will under the color of law. This is where the contempt of cop starts to happen, not the rule of law. And they will violate a citizen's rights, both physically, that they may go hands-on and put bracelets on you and move you to a car and book you, all unlawfully and illegally. So those are the two different types of responses, and there's a spectrum of that behavior that goes on. An auditor's goal is to educate law enforcement and public servants in a peaceful, lawful manner. So when I am viewing these... Oh, very good. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. I just got a response from Dr. John that he's received my email and he's busy at the moment and he'll provide some response. So Dr. John is one of those people that I know, like, and respect. And this is really a psychological question that I have regarding human behavior. I'm not a psychologist, married to one. I have some background, but I really want to touch the people that are in the know and can explore this. So I'm going to get into the psychology of this in a minute. So the auditor's goal is to educate public servants and law enforcement that what they're doing in a peaceful and law-abiding manner. And they're not there to cause harm. My broadcasts are all about education. I'm an unusual broadcaster on social media, and not many people have the attention span to consume educational content. They're more interested in watching, you know what people do on social media. I don't need to tell people. So police and public servants, in response to this form of demonstration, free exercise, lawfully, wind up rebuking all auditors and even retaliate. So the preponderance of people in public servants, when they encounter that camera, are hostile, aggressive, demeaning. I mean, I'm not saying all, but if you were to go and do a sample of these audits, you will see this common theme. There will be the outlier that somebody is like, oh, come on in and film. Hey, get my best side. That's what they say. Some people even turn on their own cameras to record and say, hey, if you can do it, I can do it. And the auditors say, you're absolutely right. Exercise your freedom of speech. Exercise yourself being a citizen journalist, like the Supreme Court says that if you have a smartphone, you're a citizen journalist. You can record and share. And the auditor's like, great. But you know what? I just want to tell you something. If that's on your personal phone and you're in the service of your public duties, I can do a Freedom of Information Request Act and get a copy of the footage that you're recording. See, the law cuts both ways. The law cuts both ways. So don't delete that, because now you'll be held accountable for destruction of public records. That's a felony. That's a felony. So I just want to draw your attention to it. I have no problem you recording me. None whatsoever. Don't do it on your personal phone, because you probably don't want your personal phone being a matter of public record, because I may make a request for not just that photo. I may ask for all communication that happened on that device that happened during this period of time that I was on the property, and all of a sudden I see your texts, I see your emails, and I see your photos. See, the law cuts both ways. And it's about educating people. It's not a threat. I'm just saying we all need to be law-abiding citizens. That's our responsibility. So about 1% of encounters after an educational discussion will continue being aggressive or engage with the auditor, apologizing for their behavior and conduct and inappropriateness. So after we inform them, if we take the time to inform them, I'm under no obligation to inform them, but if I do educate them about the Constitution and our rights and no expectation of privacy and blah, 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 that I'm not trespassing, I'm not causing a disturbance, you engaged me, I didn't engage you, that it goes on, that they, once they realize that we weren't a threat and we're trying to educate them, about 1% will say, you know what, I never knew that. I never knew that. I apologize for coming off so harsh and strong and demeaning to you. About 1% have coping mechanisms to de-escalate themselves and say, you know, I was a little off base. It was a little off base. And that the auditors are not seeking that. But it would be a wonderful gift if humanity could humble themselves and say, you know what, I was a jerk. I was really a jerk, and I'm an ass. And I'm sorry. Thank you for what you did. And I see the importance of us having people like you exercise our freedoms so we don't lose them. That would be a nice thing for an auditor to hear. As I said, it's probably less than 1%. So let's examine. I apologize. Well, that's a good thing to do. So I want to examine the psychology of their behavior. What prompts them to behave this way? We're going to go into this. So I'm going to say, when they see that camera, it's unusual to them, because cameras to them blend in their background. But when that camera comes being held by someone, they're not used to that, and they get uncomfortable. They get uncomfortable, they get fearful, they get push the panic button. So there's an emotional reaction that happens based upon their ignorance. They don't understand. They want to find out who you are, what you're doing, why are you doing this. They ask all these questions. And the auditor doesn't want to get into a discussion as to who they are, why they're there, what they're doing, and they have no obligation to communicate with anyone. They're allowed to be in public and observe what's happening in public in silence. Now, different auditors will provide, you can call me Captain Awesome, you can call me John Q. Citizen, or you can call me Ryan. You can call me any of those things. I'm not going to give you an ID. I'm not going to give you my last name or date of birth. I'm not going to give you any of that stuff. Why am I here? You know what? I might be looking at the architecture of this building. I may be here on a request from one of my followers to find out what you guys provide as services, or I may want to show and demonstrate how I'm able to get this documentation from you and ask these questions. Or I may be here on behalf of a real estate company because they're interested in sharing what is going on at this school property for their kids that they may be moving into this school district. So the realtor wants to build an inventory of the different schools and give parents a flyby or a fly-through of a school and some narrative about the school. There's any host of reasons why somebody could be in there filming, all of them lawful. So they get this emotional response. The brain goes into the reptilian side of the brain, where the brain chemistry is incredibly aggressive. The serotonin starts pumping. You get some cortisol flowing through the brain, which is an anxiety-producing chemical. And it's this fight or flight starts going in your brain, and people start that's what's coming out of them is the fight or flight, and their blood pressure elevates, their tactile skin changes, their expression on their faces change. These are all subconscious fight or flight, adrenaline, serotonin, cortisol, chemical orchestra going in their body, and they respond. So they're being fearful of the camera, and all this chemistry is happening inside of them. Somebody made a comment: in law enforcement, we don't try to upset people, but de-escalate. And I would say I think that is an admirable goal in a relationship that police officers should have with public citizens. However, while that goal is subject to the evidence of their behavior and how they achieve that goal. And when they are not aware of the other side of the equation and the amygdala response, when an officer who is equipped with a duty belt of weapons of death, what their response is. When a citizen is encountering a person with authority, with a badge and a uniform, with weapons of death, they're in a position of fear. There is some clinical data that shows encounters with police officers, and depending upon their behavior, facilitate PTSD in citizens. Now, there's a mental health crisis going on in our country, and it does not discriminate. Everyone's got this degree of mental health crisis. Hey, it's Kelly Cakes. She made a comment: we do not attack unless we feel threatened. That is a statement that you're trying to associate with an entire group of people in law enforcement. Unfortunately, you may behave that way, but your ability to express when you feel threatened is either valid or not valid. Because when someone is not equipped with weapons of death, you have superior force, you have authority, and you have backup. We can never leave freely from an encounter of a police without the fear of threat of harm. That is always the condition. When you put on those lights, the cherries and berries, a chemical response is happening to the person that you have detained and stop their freedom of movement. Give them that. Give them that. Just by those lights, that chemical starts flowing. But we're going off paths because I got a law enforcement person in here, so or someone that represents themselves as such. I don't disagree with that. And that's why you should maintain distance with somebody that you believe may be equipped with a knife or a gun. Maintain distance. Don't approach the person. If you have reasonable suspicion that they are carrying a weapon, then maintain your distance and assess the situation. Don't go and provoke what you think is something that is suspicious that somebody has a weapon. And allow them to lift up their shirt. And then make the necessary steps to do an appropriate Terry stop based upon your suspicion that you can articulate that there is a cause for you to do a pat down. Their pockets are bulging. There's a bulge in their hip. And the Terry stop is a limited search. You can't go into their pockets. But see, this is where public citizens in the auditing community understand what their rights are. And when an officer is coming in under that suspicion, their adrenaline is pumping. But the camera should not be suspicious. The camera is a camera. That should not be articulated as suspicious. I understand why officers cause it for suspicion. That's prior restraint. That's prior restraint. Unless you know for certain that that person has a prior record, you can't assume them guilty in advance. That's called prior restraint. And the only way you can determine if they have a record is to go and ID them. But you have no lawful basis to demand their ID unless they've done something criminal. People's demands, law enforcement demands for an ID absent of 24 states is an unlawful request. It's operating under the color of law. But you're taking me off path. Sorry. So all public servants function under a chain of command authority structure. If you have personal past history, I would say yes. If you're relying upon another officer's ability to tell a truth regarding a public citizen's past history, I would say do your own research. All public servants function under a chain of command authority structure. I'll refer to that structure kind of as the Milgram experiment. The Milgram experiment, if you don't know what it is, go look it up. There's a relationship between the scientist, the teacher, and the learner. The teacher is giving shocks to the learner based upon his ability to recall word sequences. And the teacher, the scientist, is instructing the teacher to continue on the test. And over 60% of the people in that test delivered shocks up to voltages where the learner was non-responsive. No, I'm not upset. Oh, I'm not. Please do not misconstrue my passion, conviction, and level of education as being upset. I welcome dialogue with officers. However, I have to stipulate that Periscope is not the best medium to communicate. So let me say that this is a lecture-based platform. So I am lecturing, and I'm being interrupted. I don't mean that in a negative sense. I'm being interrupted through comments that come through during the lecture. It's like a heckler interrupting a comedian. Again, a bad analogy. So in the lecture, I want to get through my point, and people are injecting other points on top of it. So I kind of want to address them. But if I were in a more interactive discussion, there's a lot more context that I'm sure that you want to convey to me outside of a text, which I would applaud. But this is not a format to make that easy. So I can misinterpret your text. I know there's a lot more behind your text. There's a lot more context outside of that text. And there's a lot of nonverbal that I don't have the privilege to see, hear, or feel from you, your emotional response. And you're getting it all from me, one-sided in my lecture when I'm addressing a particular point. So, and I know that I can't express it fully in relationship to your comment, and you don't have the time or the efficiency to give me a response in context. So it's a limit. It's a limit. And I acknowledge that limit. That's why I put this stuff up above and say, listen, I know I'm lecturing. I want feedback. I love feedback. I love interactive feedback. But this is not the best place for the feedback. I invite people into video conversations where you can get on screen with me side by side and ask questions and interact. I do that frequently with atheists, and it's hysterical. But we get the nonverbal. So I do have rules in how I communicate, and I've published those repeatedly as to what the code of conduct is inside of my broadcast, but I am hated on Periscope so much. I'm only doing this, I'm recording it, that I'm going to be pushing it up to YouTube for my First Amendment auditing community, which is inside of We Are John Galt, and that I'm educating not only citizens. Atheists don't like to tangle with me. They don't like to tangle with me. They don't like my rules. I have rules for engagement, and you either agree with those rules and enter into a discussion with me, and I enforce those rules, or we don't have a discussion. That's all. And I just let it known. There's no sense in me wasting time in a conversation that is not in a quest for truth. That's my opinion. My view is I am not here for somebody that is going to use logical fallacies one after another just for the sake of argument. I have better things to waste my time on than somebody that just wants to argue for the sake of argument. But my rules show and enforce that I hold you accountable to your worldview and stay in your worldview. Don't come into my worldview and argue my worldview against me. Argue from your position. I'll argue from mine. So anyway, Van, good to see you, brother. So, all U.S. public servants are legally protected from personal litigation through an instrument called qualified immunity. So their chain of command protects them, and qualified immunity protects them. So they're not held responsible for their behavior nor their actions, because this legal instrument isolates them from accountability and responsibility. Now, if you go in the domain of law enforcement and you try to litigate a law enforcement officer inside the court of secrecy, the court of secrecy already favors a bias to the truthfulness of an officer. Automatically, you have to know that walking in through those doors of secrecy, that there's a presupposition that the officer is doing things lawfully and truthfully, and they're given that unfavored balance. This finger on the scale is pushing down already in favor of an officer. All public servants must also sign a non-disclosure agreement, also referred to a confidentiality agreement. The reason this is done inside of public service is to create a structure of plausible deniability. Isolation, it's a tower of communication. It stops this cross-functional, cross-communication, interdepartmental, that everybody is operating in their own little silo, their own little swim lane, and they're not going to cross the lane markers to get into the other swim lane. There's none of this cross back and forth. That's why you will hear congressional hearings are just so myopic in their questioning, because that confidentiality agreement resides there. That's a mental health crisis. You're talking about why patients in the ER behave. We got a mental health crisis, which is an epidemic. It's an epidemic. And I have reasons. I am surviving, Van. I'm surviving. It's my recovery is a challenge. It's a challenge. But as you see, I'm trying to fight the fight. So let's keep going. Is the combination of the chain of command structure, which I attribute to behaviors in the Milgram experiment, combined with these legal contracts, meaning the qualified immunity that civil servants are protected by, in addition to the confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements, protect them from deploying coping mechanisms and don't hold them accountable to even be required to put those coping mechanisms in, and their behavior is justified. And when their behavior is justified, there is no reason for them to apologize. So let me ask the police officer or the person in law enforcement that's in here, let me ask 2 questions, and this will kind of be a social validation experiment. In your times of service in law enforcement, how many times as you as an individual or those people in the thin blue line have stopped an officer going beyond the rule of law, stepping into the color of law, acting unlawfully? How many times have you stopped an officer demanding an ID where your law doesn't require you to obtain an ID? How many times has anybody done that in their career? And then how many times has an officer sat on a witness stand and testified against another officer operating unlawfully? This is part of this contractual protection, the qualified immunity, the non-disclosure, the confidentiality, the chain of command, prevent that from happening. And it is rationalized and justified and excused because of those legal instruments and the culture that they're involved in this protection, where this public citizens, which are employees of the citizens, have permission and excuse to behave any way they want. This is not anecdotal. When you look at the examination of viewing First Amendment audits and when they encounter public citizens, draw your own conclusions based upon these things that I'm bringing forward. So when an auditor is confronted by John Q. Public, confused about why somebody is filming a public, based upon their own lack of understanding of the Constitution, the laws, and traffic codes and fire codes, when they learn that the auditor is behaving lawfully and is not causing a disturbance, and they say, I am here, I'm operating lawfully, I'm allowed to be here, the eyes cannot trespass, they go through this education, the citizen apologizes when they're willing to listen to the auditor. I've only seen one video where an officer directly called out other officers for violating rights. I've seen two. I've been involved in over 1,000 of them, and that's being conservative, but I've seen two. I've seen an officer chasing Eric Brandt, deployed his taser. One of the tasers came out of his skin, and he was running away, and Eric Brandt ran in front of a captain, and the captain stopped the officer from chasing Eric Brandt and said, he's not doing anything wrong, not doing anything wrong. And he said, but he failed to ID. He doesn't have to give you his ID, and he stopped that officer. And unfortunately, that taser barb in Eric Brandt had to be surgically removed because it went so deep into his skin. That officer was reprimanded, not of any consequence. He was taken 2 days off without pay. But there was a lawsuit that filed to the city where this happened, and he wound up getting a civil suit against the city for violation of rights. But the officer got off free because of that chain of command and that qualified immunity, and that's the structure. So yes, I've seen two. One I just examined. But I'm drawing a compare and contrast that when John Q. Citizen, that doesn't have those protections of qualified immunity. Take care, Van. Thanks for joining. Doesn't have those legal protections, or doesn't have non-disclosure and confidentiality, doesn't have the chain of command, all of those things. John Q. Citizen, depending upon their mental stability and their ability to calm down their amygdala response, may get to the point and saying, I never thought about that. I never thought about that. Thanks for sharing that with me. I was uncomfortable with it, but now I understand. I got to get over it. An auditor will often say, citizens will say, but there's minors in here. Folks, the auditor will tell you that if you happen to go to your kids playing pee-wee soccer or t-ball, there's many parents filming their kids playing sports in a public space. And they may be capturing other kids, your kid, playing pee-wee soccer or pee-wee football or whatever. They're minor children. That's a lawful activity. You may not like it. You may want to record your kid and a parent saying to, hey, get my kid off of film. You could respectfully make a decision that, you know what, I'm not going to film their kid. But you have no obligation to stop filming their kid. This is public. There is no expectation of privacy in public. So I wanted to examine the psychological differences of behavior, specifically in the domain of public servants, and how it is uniquely different from citizens. And I've identified a couple of things that I feel that can contribute to that. I know if I, as an employee, behave the way public servants do to their employee, I wouldn't be employed. If I treat my boss the way a postal employee treats me with the camera, I would lose my job. I would lose my job, flat out. I wouldn't get 2 days off without pay. I would not get a subtle reprimand. I'd be terminated on the spot. But public servants, for some reason, explore. So I'm going to share this with my YouTube audience and share it inside of We Are John Galt. Let me put this up here. Let me turn this off. Whoops. So my ability to be reached is, over here. We Are John Galt. That's an educational platform that is intended for bringing unity between the auditing community, the citizens, and police officers. Now, police officers, when you're acting outside your lawful duties and you're functioning under the color of law and you do something unlawful with the citizens, such as detain them for an investigation where you have no reasonable or articulable suspicion of a crime or you have no probable cause, it's an unlawful detainment. And no matter what you say, so here is the thing. This is suspicious behavior. Suspicious behavior is not a misdemeanor nor a felony. So your detainment for investigative, conduct your investigation first before you detain someone unlawfully. I'm saying if If you're going to investigate, if you're going to do a detention for an investigation, auditor's going to shut up. And they're going to give you a link and say, you violated my civil rights. And I'm putting you on notice. And you can go do your investigation. Go to this link and do your investigation while you unlawfully detain me. I'll give you that much assistance. But I'm not talking to you anymore. I will not submit to your interrogation. I will not ID because you have no reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime, that a crime has occurred, a crime is afoot, or a crime is about to occur. You have no evidence. You have zero evidence. And a police 911 call is not evidence. That's called hearsay. So go conduct your investigation. Go into the post office. Look at the video recordings. Don't deal with what somebody says verbally, because what I say verbally, you don't value. You don't value it. When I tell you somebody assaulted me, I have to show you evidence. But when somebody claims I assault them, you have no evidence. You don't have evidence. You'll just charge me. You'll even charge me for trespass when I didn't commit a crime during trespass. You'll unlawfully trespass me from public. I will adhere and submit to your function under color of law in trespassing me. I'm telling you, you need to leave. If you do not leave at this moment, I am going to arrest you under criminal trespass. I will submit and exit the property under your unlawful orders. Unlawful, because I am fear of my life, that if I do not obey you, you have weapons and instruments of death to cause me harm. You will assault me. You will grab my person. You will put these restraints and go against the nerve of my arm. And no matter how much I say that's too tight, you're not going to worry about it. You're going to put me in a hot box and sweat me out. And then you're going to come in and start interrogating me, where I'm going to remain silent. And then you're going to try to book me under some false charges, obstruction of justice. What is your first cause? What is your first cause to claim that I'm obstructing justice? I'm obstructing your investigation. I have no obligation to assist you in your investigation. I didn't ID. I had no obligation to ID because you have no crime. Impeding an investigation. I'm not impeding your investigation. Go investigate. I'm remaining silent. Pull me before the judge. Judge is going to say, who are you? I will say, who I am is irrelevant. Why am I here? Why am I here? You impeded an investigation. Your Honor, I have no obligation to assist them in their investigation. I had the right to remain silent. Well, you are obstructing justice. What justice was I obstructing? You caused a disturbance. No, Your Honor, I didn't cause a disturbance. Those public servants and this public servants here, they're the disturbance. I remained silent. I was holding a camera. I have an objective record of everything that this officer is representing as being a lie. Well, you need to identify. Charge me with the crime first before failure ID is a secondary charge. What crime did I commit in order which I would be obligated to provide my ID? What crime? And they have nothing. And I walk out of the judge with no charges because everything was done unlawfully under the color of law. Auditors know this. And they understand that a contempt of cop emotion, escalation occurs, that they need to impose their will under the color of law, not the rule of law. They're being unlawful. Their intimidation tactics, their threat, their force of duress and or coercion is a conspiracy. They don't do this one-on-one. They bring 2, 3, 6 officers in front of that guy with the camera, and they barrage him with questions to try to put the auditor on their heels. And that's a conspiracy. Those are terroristic threats because all of those guys are equipped with tasers, batons, mace, pepper spray, and guns. Assault weapons, as progressives like to call them. All against a law-abiding, freedom-fighting, peaceful camera. Why? We are John Galt. We are reclaiming our liberties, and we want to do it in a peaceful and lawful way. And I just want to examine the psychology of the behavior of those that go in a direction which is assaulting, combative, rebuke, hostile, demeaning. These are our employees. And as long as we submit to their will, our liberties are eroded. Not everybody has the intestinal fortitude to stand up in the face of that threat of violence and say, calm down. I'm not doing anything wrong. You may not like it, but you're not the feelings police. You are not George Orwell's thought police. You don't know what my thoughts are. You're making assumptions because you still have no evidence. You don't know that I wasn't playing Pokemon with my damn camera. You're making assumptions as to what I'm doing to build your narrative, but you have zero evidence. Look at my phone and verify that I'm recording because I may have Pokemon on my screen. Auditors will not entrap you, but what they're going to do for law enforcement is give them a platform. I'm here. I'm doing something lawfully and peacefully. You come up to me, you're stepping on the platform. You are behaving how you choose to behave. I have no responsibility for how a citizen steps on that platform or how a law enforcement steps on that platform. You own your own behavior and conduct. Citizen, public servant, law enforcement, we're all accountable for our own behavior. If I'm afraid and I act inappropriately, I got to be held responsible to that. If you're afraid and you act inappropriately or unlawfully, you got to be held accountable to that. We're talking about accountability and transparency. All right, so I'm going to end this recording and put this up on YouTube, included in John Galt. I invite people that are interested in learning about more about how to reclaim our rights in a peaceful, law-abiding way. Join the community of people that are out there doing it and learn from them. Learn from them. And this is not for everybody, but it's wise for people to know. Whether you choose to exercise it or not, be thankful for those people that are out there fighting for our rights. And it's not fighting for a right to party. It's fighting for a right for freedom and liberty. Everybody have a great day. Thanks for those people that stopped in. And hope to see you over at We Are John Galt. It's a growing community with some really fantastic human beings. Really some quality people. So take care, everybody.